For some reason, this is not picking up the desktop audio. What the fuck is going on? What the hell? You know what? If I'm just picking up my own audio, then you can send me your audio if I need it. It's fine.
I am sitting in the morning at the diner on the counter and waiting at the counter for the Oliver to pour the coffee. And he fills it only halfway before I even argue. He is looking out the window, somebody coming in. Oh, wow. Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren.
And I'm Super Swag T-Boy Oliver.
You Super Swag T-Boy Oliver. And you are listening to Optimism of the Will. Oliver and I saw a movie together recently that's been causing quite a stir within the transgender community. And that movie is called I Saw the TV Glow. It's a horror film. It came out earlier this year. And it's about two queer people, their relationship to a TV series made for teen girls. And then there's a lot of themes about gender identity, transitioning, repression, and so forth. And Oliver and I watched it, and you know what? I think we liked it. What do you think, Oliver?
You know, the first time I saw it, I do like it, and it definitely gave me a little bit of a panic attack, actually. I mean, I feel like it's a very actually incredible representation of the experience of realizing that you're trans. And for honestly a lot of people, like cis queer people, I've read that they've felt like it resonated with their experience as well, with the realization that your identity might not be what you thought it was, and the like sheer horror that a person might go through when they're figuring out this part of themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah, so if you haven't seen it, go watch it, because that's what we're talking about today. Come back. Yeah, I liked it. I liked it too. My friend begged me to watch it. She literally said, I will give you, she's also a trans femme. She said, I will give you money to go watch it. And she sent me like $20. And I was like, all right, I guess I'm go watching it.
What? I watched it for free.
Yeah. This is
definitely a must watch.
I've rewatched
for
it
trans people,
Oliver,
though.
Yeah. Sorry, I should say. I rewatched it later with Oliver. I did see it before, but Oliver and I wanted to do this episode because we thought it was relevant for trans people and our audience. Starting with, what I liked about the movie was like it covered, like Oliver was saying, it covered a lot of like the sense of being that very, very early like awakening to your identity, and then how you can handle it in like a certain way that was explored.
Yeah, and the certain way that the character handles it, or at least the main character, is in a way that is, I think most queer people would agree, is like obviously very unhealthy. Mm-hmm. The way that the main character avoids their queerness, their transness, and their approaching of the realization is by avoidance. And I do think at the very end of the film, we see that the main character does finally approach this part of themselves whenever Owen is cutting themselves open, as you mentioned. And I do think that this probably is one of those films where, you know, in the queer community, we do have a lot of experiences, whether it be ourselves or people in our lives who are queer, a lot of experiences with self-harm, a lot of experiences with suicide. And these are themes in the film, especially with the burying alive, especially the way that the character describes being buried alive, that I just realized probably a good idea to put like a little bit of a content warning on that, because we're going to be discussing that. And it might be something to be aware of. Like maybe check does the dog die before watching this film if you haven't seen it already, because it genuinely is a little bit intense.
It covers a lot of like textually plot elements of the queer / trans experience. But it was also visually very interesting from a trans and queer experience. It hints a lot at how like overarching and all-consuming these thoughts can feel when you're early on in the closet. There's a lot of shots of like Owen where they'll be surrounded by like the trans flag colors as like symbology for like, you know, what's going on in the background, literally in the background behind them as they're going through life. You know, when you're figuring this stuff out, like it does feel very encompassing. It feels like, you know, there's a lot going on in the background that you may not necessarily be aware of the time. It's like sometimes it takes a long ass time before you figure out, oh, I'm queer, I'm trans. So there's a lot of that visual language. Like when you do watch it, pay very close attention to things like lighting, for example. It's a very visual movie. The kind of stuff I've come to expect from A24 films.
I feel comfortable describing this film as kind of Lynchian. Like, I've been watching a lot of David Lynch lately, like super into Twin Peaks and stuff.
Hold on.
I do think
Oliver is understating how much he's been watching Twin Peaks. He's been doing nothing but watching Twin Peaks. Every time I talk to him, he's like, Twin Peaks!
I mean, I'm about to get like my account at the library shut down if I don't return Twin Peaks within the next 5 days.
So Oliver's been obsessed with David Lynch and Twin Peaks. Don't let him undersell it to you.
But what I noticed that I think is very David Lynch about this movie is, one, how like abstract and dreamlike and surreal the entire film is. And there's also sort of like an unreality that is the reality of the film. So, for example, whenever I say that, the fiction in the film, you would imagine, is just fiction. It's an unreality, but really it's part of the reality of the characters. I think something that's really important to understand about this film is that the two protagonists, Owen and Maddie, really are the fictional characters that they are relating to. And they share a lot with like the journey, the like fictional text of the story that's happening in the Pink Opaque. A lot of the stuff that they're going through is stuff that the characters Owen and Maddie are going through. And so, you know, very key to understanding this film is that Owen is Isabel and Maddie is Tara. And Maddie does go so far as to suggest to Owen that this might be the case. And I wanted to bring up this quote from the film that I think Lauren has a bit to say about. So Owen and Maddie are talking, and Owen says, "When I think about that stuff, it feels like someone took a shovel and dug out all my insides. And I know there's nothing in there, but I'm still too nervous to open myself up and check. I know there's something wrong with me. My parents know it too. Even if they don't say anything. Do you ever feel like that?" And Maddie says, "I don't know. Maybe you're like Isabel, afraid of what's inside you."
Right. And the context for how that scene comes about is they're literally sitting, you know, on the school bleachers. And Maddie is asking Owen, like, do you like girls? And when you're so, this is kind of hard thing about being trans. There's different layers to your identity, and when you're trying to figure it all out all at once, it can be really hard. So Julia Serrano touches on this a bit in Whipping Girl. You have, biological gender, you have a subconscious gender, you have gender expression, you have your sexual orientation. So this scene happens for most of the movie. Up to that point, Owen's a kid, and then it shifts into puberty and post-puberty. This is like when shit hits the fan for trans people. when you hit puberty, you have these different elements of your identity that you're trying to figure out. And in real life and in the film, you struggle because there's expectations for how you're supposed to be like, which Oliver can touch on in a moment. So you're trying to figure all this out, right? You're trying to figure out who you are, and that can literally be so scary that you don't want to think about it, which is what I went through when I was figuring out I was trans. Like very early, like when in my teens, I figured out I was bi, and that went more or less okay. Trans was a huge deal, though. I was 22, working in a sushi restaurant, and the thought hit me. I was just washing dishes, and I was thinking like girl thoughts. I was thinking about being a cute girl, and then the thought finally just hit me one day, because I've done this so much without really thinking about it, but it just finally hit me. It's like, holy shit, am I a girl? And that was so scary. I buried it deep down inside for years, for literal years. And that's where, Owen was at. And this is where a lot of trans or queer people are at some point in their lives, where those feelings can be so scary. They don't know what to do. And they don't want to look at it. And spoiler alerts, we're spoiling the crap out of this movie, by the way. At the end of the movie, Owen literally has to cut open their chest, and they look to see what's inside, and it's the TV static from the Pink Opaque, the show that they're watching. Yeah. So Oliver, going back a bit, when we think about how hard it is to reconcile identity or figuring out for yourself because of outside environmental factors, a very interesting point you brought up was this is kind of Mr. Melancholy's relationship to the characters, who is Mr. Melancholy is like the big bad of the film.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Melancholy isn't just the big bad of the film. He's also the big bad that the protagonists are facing in the fiction of the Pink Opaque in the story. Mm-hmm. And so what is explained about Mr. Melancholy, he's a moon. He's a guy in the sky, and he's a very spooky guy. And what I think he really ultimately represents, being the big bad of this story, is the overwhelming force that is a system of cishet normativity, as well as heterotemporality. A recurring theme in this film is time, and part of that is running out of time. But the other part of that is how does a queer person move through time? And I believe it was a video that Philosophy Tube put out a few years ago, and I'm pretty sure it was whenever she was coming out as bi, which is before she transitioned, that she talked about this concept of heterotemporality and queer time. And so we're going to contrast these two things so I can explain to you guys what this stuff means. Heterotemporality is basically this idea that to live a valid life in a cis heteronormative society, you're going to meet these specific milestones that affect your identity at certain points in your life, at certain ages. So whenever you're born, you're going to be given a name and you're going to be assigned a gender, and you are expected to keep that throughout your entire life. Like until you die, that's going to be your name and your gender forever. This massive expectation. And there's actually a part where the characters are experiencing queer repression in both the fiction and the reality of the story. They say that Mr. Melancholy takes away their real names, their superpowers, and their hearts. And I do want to come back to the superpowers thing.
Yes.
Remind me, we got to go back to the superpowers. Yes. And so that's heterotemporality. There's not just like the name and the assigned gender at birth, but you're expected to go through one and only one puberty according to like that gender assignment in your early teens. And for a lot of intersex kids, if that development isn't what heterotemporality demands of them, they will be subjected to surgeries at very young ages without their consent or their knowledge, so that they can conform to those expectations. And for trans people, trans kids who do experience some support might go on puberty blockers, for example. Cis or trans kids, if their puberty is too early, they may be put on blockers. So there's this expectation of when puberty starts. There's an expectation of in your teens, you're supposed to start getting interested in the opposite gender in a romantic and sexual way. And so, of course, there's going to be a lot of asexual, aromantic people and like bisexual or gay people who aren't going to be fitting into that through their teens. They aren't going to meet these expected developmental milestones in that heterotemporal lens. And of course, after that, I mean, for me personally, I'm Catholic. So my parents basically expected me to be like barefoot and pregnant before I was like 27. And for, you know, maybe families who aren't that conservative, not that extreme, your parents probably want you to be married to somebody of the opposite gender and having babies so that they can be grandparents, right? There's like these, you're supposed to do this at this age, this at that age. But for queer people, it's often the case that, well, for example, I've had 2 puberties. That's well outside of the expectation in that heterotemporal expectation. And one of my puberties that I went through was in my late 20s, early 30s. I only kept that name and that gender identity that was assigned to me at birth until I was 26. And then I had functionally a new identity from that point on. I'm not married and I'm never going to have kids. And so functionally, this is what queer time is, that when we meet these milestones, if we meet these milestones, that's going to be different depending on whether or not you're queer. And so Mr. Melancholy, the big bad in the show, has like, he's asserting like an oppressive control over time. And that's what he does as a villain. Is I think he enforces the cis heterotemporality like expectations of these milestones. And, you know, for a film that's very, very interested in the movement of time and the milestones and development of queer people, I really think that that's what Mr. Melancholy is all about. And I really love his name too.
Yeah.
I mean, like queer people, especially closeted queer people, like experiencing that kind of repression, do often experience a great deal of melancholy, of depression.
That's true. It's very.
We gotta get to the superpowers.
Yeah. I wanted to touch on, this idea of like oppressive normativity. Owen's relationship with their father, throughout the movie, it's very strongly hinted like their dad's abusive in some sense. Like their Owen's character is like afraid of like even speaking with their dad and like asking them if they can have a sleepover, and like there is an abuse scene in it. And Oliver touched on a bit about their own experiences about facing those gendered expectations from their family and broadly society at large. Being Catholic. I am Vietnamese. My parents are Vietnamese immigrants. I was the firstborn son. That's a big deal in Vietnamese culture. There's a lot of loaded expectations there to be like this very strong masculine archetype who has to take responsibility for a lot of things. And for a long time, I wanted to be that. I wanted to meet a masculine archetype and try to be like a manly man. And I think in part that was driven from like fear of my own feelings about gender and how I felt inside. If my parents saw me today, if their firstborn son is now a girl, they would not react well to that. And I think that was part of the fear surrounding like my gender, was this, because people have expectations for your identity. They expect you to behave in a certain way, and they want to file you in like a special box,
I think it's definitely a theme in this movie that it's often the parents who are doing the work of enforcing those expectations. And both of the protagonists in this story are victims of abuse from their parents. Mm-hmm. And what we see from Maddie is dealing with underparenting, I think, where Owen is dealing with overparenting. Mm-hmm. Owen wants to watch a TV show that comes on at 10:30, and he's like 14.
Yeah.
And his parents say no. Mm-hmm. Owen's dad says, "Isn't that a girl's show?" In a really like disgusted, judgmental way.
If you've never had Owen, that experience, like, shut it's down. Terrifying. To be that young and like getting that kind of rejection from your parents.
And Owen shows a lot of like secrecy, trying to sneak around to just watch a damn TV show. Mm-hmm. Like this interaction with their identity to just like escape into this feminine fiction is genuinely dangerous for Owen. And we see the underparenting where Maddie says, "My parents don't give a shit when I go to bed. My parents just really don't give a shit." Maddie also says that, and she says it in like such a casual way. Just make sure you get out of the house before dawn, or my dad's going to break my nose again. And so I do, man, like something that's like really unfortunate that I think about sometimes with trans and queer people is sometimes I'll be like, man, why do so many of us have abusive parents? Like, why is this such a common experience for us? And it's like, unfortunately, it's often the case that the same parents who raised and abused these trans or queer kids will be like wonderful supporting parents to the non-queer siblings, right? And we don't necessarily see that in this film specifically, but that's like a very unfortunate reality that queer kids often experience this kind of abuse, often in an effort to repress their queerness.
If you're And if you're a queer child and you don't have the support of a family, you know, what do you do? Where do you end up? Well, for queers like Oliver and I, we had to find our own community, which leads us back to the superpowers of the movies.
Superpowers.
Yes.
So in the fiction of the Pink Opaque, Maddie describes that that Isabel and Tara have superpowers, and that superpower is their psychic connection. And, you know, in the very beginning of the film, whenever you see Owen and Maddie meet each other, you know, there was no real reason for them to interact. They were just kind of like hanging out. They're just sitting around waiting for their, you know, Owen's waiting for their parents to get done with something, and Maddie is hanging out after class. It seems like she has a supportive teacher who may or may not know that she's being abused, so that teacher lets her stay late. Which is also, unfortunately, a pretty common experience for queer kids. You have like the art teacher who helps you, you know, which is sweet, but you know, Owen looks at Maddie and it's like they sense something. It's not just the Pink Opaque that Maddie's holding. It's not just the book. But Owen feels like compelled to go over and talk to Maddie, even when you get the sense that Owen's like an isolated, lonely kid who doesn't make a lot of connections to other people. And this has been the case in my life, and this has been repeatedly the case in a lot of queer people's lives that I've heard people say, where you just kind of like, and it sounds very magical and it feels very magical, but we're like trans people kind of just like find each other. And, you know, Owen and Maddie don't know each other and don't know that the other is experiencing similar things to them. And this happened with me and my girlfriend, DJ, that we were 11, 12 years old whenever we met on the school bus. And I was not openly queer. I didn't know I was trans until I was 25, 26. And we just kind of like, we just found each other, and then, you know, we just stayed close. And this was also the case for, you know, my girlfriend DJ had a really close friend growing up in middle school and in high school. And she came out as trans and started transitioning before my girlfriend did. And, you know, it's interesting because like sometimes you'll look back, like sometimes you might lose these connections, and later you're like, man, that motherfucker was my bestie back in elementary school. I wonder how they're doing. And they're gay. They're all gay. It's like, it's very often the case that like a lot of a lot of trans people and a lot of queer people have this connection.
Right. And in the movie, you know, Owen, so the Pink Opaque in the show, it's their power is represented by a pink tattoo that they have on the back of their necks, And partway through the movie, Maddie makes an offer to Owen, like, "Hey, run away with me. We shouldn't have to live like this. Just let's just leave." And you know, contextually, you know, what that means is like it's an invitation to be like to explore your identity, right? And Owen rejects that. And they reject it quite literally in the film, because Maddie takes a gel pen, like a marker, and draws the tattoo from the Pink Opaque on the back of Owen's neck, and Owen literally scrubs it off, symbolically disconnecting them from queer community. And we see how rapidly downhill their life gets after that happens.
I do think the running away was not only symbolic, but like a true representation of what it is like for a lot of queer kids. You know, I mean, I've mentioned on this podcast before that I worked with a homeless shelter for youth, and queer trans kids are very, very overrepresented in the homeless community. A lot of us have to run away to avoid abuse. You know, the options, I mean, for Maddie, for example, Maddie was accused of groping a girl, right, in class. And so she was like experiencing alienation and isolation, and like being treated like some kind of, I don't know, being treated like a freak, like an abuser because she's queer.
Mm-hmm.
And so her options are, do I want to stay here with my dad who's hitting me, with my friends who are calling me a freak, or do I want to be on my own and risk what it's going to be like alone? And of course, like the ideal option would be that Owen would come with her, right? It's hard watching that scene because it's like, gosh, this like really happens to a lot of queer teenagers.
One of the big themes in I Saw the TV Glow is the queer character's relationship to media. If you're like Oliver and I, and you grew up in like a very conservative and abusive environment, you might not have a lot of experiences with queerness. And quite possibly, and I get a sense this is pretty common, your only kind of experience with that can come from media that you consume. So the Pink Opaque is like, it's pretty clearly like a Buffy the Vampire inspired kind of like 90s schlocky TV show. But it speaks to a very real phenomenon that happens in a lot of queer people's lives because of their isolation from queerness. So for example, like I remember whenever Naruto started getting like super popular, like I think like this was like season 3 Naruto or whatever, this character Haku is introduced, and they're like a gender non-conforming ninja. They're a boy who expresses their gender very femininely. And I remember being young and watching this and having like this really weird sense. Like I felt something, but I couldn't like describe what that feeling was. But what that feeling was like, it was literally like my subconscious gender recognizing something that I was. I don't know. Oliver, did you ever have experience with that with media?
First I was going to say with Haku in Naruto that I'd be really interested, if anybody knows in the comments section, please let us know. But I know that I watched a lot of this part of Naruto in English. In Japanese, you use the pronoun I. There's more than one I, and it can be gendered. So I'd be interested to hear, does Haku use watashi like a girl or boku like a boy? Because in Japanese media where gender identity is a theme, that can be like really telling about the character. Yeah, so if anybody knows, please, because I was like just trying to look it up and I didn't see it, but we should find out.
That's very interesting. We got to subscribe
I would say
to Crunchyroll.
For me, for my Pink Opaque, maybe, or maybe my, like, getting my cogs turning about gender identity movie when I was a kid was definitely Mulan, which is like a little bit of a stereotype among trans boys. But yeah, I just remember so much that when I was little, like the Reflection song, whenever that would be happening, I'm like, what is this awakening in me? There's something stirring in me right now, and I don't really know what it is.
Yes, it's communicating to a deep deep part of like your brain. Like literally, I think, I think that's just what it is for trans people. Like we have different brains.
Got that boy brain.
Yeah. I really like Mulan. All right. So a big theme.
I don't know if this is what you're about to bring up, but more than once in the show, I don't remember if we talked about it yet, but they say it can't hurt you if you don't think about it.
Yes.
And that's one of the opening lines of the movie.
What was the context for it again?
So Owen is watching, I think, just like a commercial for the Pinko Pig that's coming on TV. And they're like, looking interested, like they want to watch. And they're saying like, there's a villain of the week called the Drain Lords. And they're going, they can't hurt you if you don't think about them.
The Drain Lords.
Yeah, Drain Lords. And, it really, the not thinking about it, it definitely falls into line with that quote that I read earlier of like, if I took a shovel and dug out all my insides, I know nothing's in there, but I'm still too nervous to open myself up and check.
Right.
So, yeah.
So in the context,
it's that idea of repression.
Yeah. In the context of I Saw the TV Low, what happens in the reality of Owen can take, like, that part takes place over literally years, but in the actual reality where they're fighting all these monsters and whatnot, that can be like minutes or seconds even. So what we get is we see what happens when you repress for years, and where that ends up taking you. Like, do you remember that scene near the very end where Owen is very old, like literally dying, like they're very sick, coughing everywhere, and they keep saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And everyone is just ignoring them. Everyone is just ignoring them because, like, they don't care. They don't care. Like, you could have been transitioned this whole time. It would have been fine. What are you apologizing for? That's how I read it, anyway.
Yeah, I don't know. I was just really wanting to bring up the there is still time sidewalk chalk, right?
Right.
And like Owen is constantly getting these messages where it's like, it's okay. You can do this. You can transition. Like, why are you?
Yes.
Like, ultimately, it comes to a point where it's like, yes, there are a lot of oppressive forces, but like, you are ruining your own life. Like, you need to take this step. This is who you are. And that's what I think a lot of this movie is about, pushing Owen and trying to get Owen to act to save their own life by transitioning.
Oliver and I actually spoke about this a little the other day. Whenever cis people, you're talking about your transition to them, and they're like, "Oh, you're so brave." No, it was we do this or we die. that's what it came down to. And I think that's why this movie caused such a big splash in the trans community. Because, like, literally, you are dying as you run out of time. You only have so much time as a person on this earth. Do you really want to spend it lying about who you are?
And whenever Owen has that meltdown, what Owen says is, somebody help me. I think I'm dying. Somebody help me. And dying in this sense is, I'm running out of time. Somebody, like, do something about this. And previously they would have had Maddie's help. And since Owen like scrubbed off the tattoo, since Owen tattled on Maddie's plans, since Owen like repeatedly rejected Maddie's attempts to help, like Owen becomes alone, and then many years later Owen is finally like, oh my god, I can't do this anymore. And it really is like a really good demonstration of what that feels like as a trans person, to realize, oh my god, I have to do this or I'm going to die.
When I was transitioning, when I was in denial about my gender identity, it was honestly like a lot of going back and forth between like, oh, of course I'm trans and of course I'm not trans. What a crazy thought. And I think this is a pretty common experience amongst many trans folks. You know, a lot of the time for trans people, it comes back to this question of, well, am I trans? And that's such like a big thing, you know? And I also think it's the wrong question to be asking. I think really what it kind of comes down to is, do you want to transition? And if you want to break that down further, it's like, do you want to try out new pronouns? Do you want to, I don't know, grow out your hair or cut it, as it may be? And you can make those little decisions to help you out. But eventually you have to make like that plunge, you know? You can keep dipping your toes, but you only have 10 toes. Eventually, you're gonna have to make that choice for yourself. And how that came about for me was, I was literally like being driven insane by like this constant flip-flopping about if I wanted to transition or not, or if I was trans or not. And finally, what it just came down to was like, I can't keep living like this. I'm going to transition and find out for sure if this is for me. Because I just can't keep doing this.
For a lot of trans people, like the straw that broke the camel's back is often the like peering into your imagined future and thinking about yourself when you're old, right? Like Owen at the end of the movie. And I've heard a lot of trans people say, well, I really figured it out when I imagined myself and I realized I couldn't see myself as an old man, or I couldn't see myself as an old woman. Like when I see myself as old, it has to be like this or nothing. Like either I'm dead and I'm functionally genderless if you're not alive, I guess. But yeah, I don't know.
That movie, that particular sequence, that then freaked me out a ton when I first saw it, because like Owen, I worked at a movie theater for years. I worked at an arcade. I was Owen. I was literally doing that, pressing my gender feelies. I
was actually kind of interested in just like the idea of Owen working at a movie theater. That for a lot of trans people, or a lot of people who are like running away from some part of themselves or like something in their life that they're deeply unhappy with, that the idea is that this person might dip more into fiction and get more absorbed into fiction than they are like interested in their actual life, right? And so I wondered if that might be like another theme where like why Owen is working at a movie theater in particular.
Yeah, as like part of that escapism. All right. Any final thoughts on the movie, Oliver?
Mostly I just thought it was really fucking good. I don't know if I brought this up earlier. The key feelings that I kind of walked away from this movie experiencing, because like while this is like a pretty abstract film, like very surreal and dreamlike. I think most people will walk away at least with like the feelings of like isolation, loneliness, shame, detachment, the like escaping from reality and the secrecy. I really think that like those emotions that are like stirred up by that film and communicated by that film are also very key to understanding both the film and the queer experience, like the the shame especially. And I really think it's like overwhelming shame is probably one of like the main things that's stopping Owen, right?
Yeah.
Actually, wait. There's one more thing I wanted to say about this, which is like there's one scene where I think it really demonstrates that like cishet culture can be very, very different from queer culture. And there's like this detachment where Owen just doesn't belong. Do you remember whenever Owen's working at the movie theater and one of the first things you see is there is another, like a coworker, and Owen knocks on the door and they're having some heterosexual sexual relations with somebody behind the door. And their reaction, you know, first like, oh, don't open the door, but then like laughing and later saying like, hey, Owen, did you like what you saw? Oh, Owen. And I feel like part of that is like first like the like misogyny, ownership kind of like relation with like sexuality for a lot of straight men. And like Owen doesn't care for it. Owen doesn't belong in that space. Owen doesn't like that shit. And so Owen's not responding. And this guy who's asking like, oh, did you like that, is getting belligerent, like getting angry at Owen. And it's one of those things where like repeatedly you see Owen does not have like a strong connection to anyone in their life except for Maddie, like the other queer person that was in Owen's life. And so it can kind of make the film feel even more frustrating. Like I feel frustrated at Owen when I watch it because I'm like, oh my God, Maddie's saying, come run away with me. Go with Maddie, please. Like, please just go. I don't know. You just like kind of watch this person deny their identity for so long. And it is painful to watch. And like Lauren and I think both have had a lot of people in our lives where like they might come out to us as like, oh, I'm trans, but like I'm never going to come out because it would ruin my life. And it's like, God, that's like such a frustrating thing to deal with. And it's like, ultimately it's not my place just to tell somebody, but I don't know. It's so hard to watch somebody sit and wait and bide their time and like they are slowly dying with an identity that isn't them, that's totally shrouded in secrecy and shame. And it's just hard to watch. It's like existentially terrifying to see somebody go through that.
I find it so hard to spend time with those kind of people. Like I don't know. I just can't do it. I don't want to be around that.
And it feels sometimes almost like a statement about trans lives, right? Where they're like, well, I don't want to live the kind of life that you live.
Yeah.
And it's like, why not? I'm fucking happy.
Yeah.
Like, I'm so much happier than you are. It's hard to, you know, like your life looks horrible to me. I just can't imagine living like that forever. Like I lived like that until I was 26 and that was enough.
Absolutely. So the big thesis of the movie was like, I think its basic message was like, you know, you are dying, but you still have time.
Which is, optimistic.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is an optimistic movie. It's an incredibly sad movie, but I think that is a kind of optimism. Hey, optimism. That's what we do.
That is what we do. There is still time, listeners.
There was this scene in the movie where Owen goes to a drive-thru and they order 2 cheeseburgers and then like a drink and like I think an ice cream. That struck me as really weird. Because that's like a 2-person order, but they just got it for themselves. I don't know. I didn't like it.
I think it was also like I don't know. The scene was supposed to be like very uncomfortable in part because of like the communication problem between Owen and the drive-thru person.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to like do a little bit more thinking about that scene and figure out like what are they trying to convey here?
Well, I think it was an allegory because like Maddie was supposed to be there. Maddie's supposed to be eating the second burger. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. Maybe
you might be right.
That's too much of my English degree showing up in this burger. Maybe Owen just likes burgers a lot.
I mean, burgers are pretty good.
Burgers. That's a lot of food for one person, though. That is a lot of food for one person. I'm trying to think if anything else came up in that movie. For me... I'm just reading through my notes.
There's like a lot to talk about with this movie. And it's like genuinely impossible to go over like all of the symbolism and like all of the themes because it's a very dense movie.
It is.
I think.
It is very dense.
There's like in my opinion, they equate the denying of your identity to suffocating, not just dying, and not just running out of time, but like being snuffed out and being suffocated, being buried alive. That's how they, like through symbolism, that's how they describe that type of identity death.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is like, it's slow, but it's still violent.
It can be like really explosive in your life because you're not escaping your subconscious gender. Like Maddie disappears for 8 years before she shows up again in the film. And that's like, I think kind of a metaphor for how like, you're not going to escape these trans thoughts. They're going to be resurgent. And you keep repressing them and you're going to, there's that massive blow up scene near the end of the movie. Because you're not escaping the trans thoughts. You're not repressing it so deep that it's never going to come up again. It's going to come up again.
It reminds me of, I'm often in the subreddit Ask Transgender, and I see so often repressed trans people coming in and saying, hey, so I know I'm trans, but is there any way I could like not be? And everybody's like, yeah, so what you're thinking of is conversion therapy. And not only is it genuinely torture, but it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Like if you want, you can go to one of these like quote unquote therapies. You can seek that out and you can gain more shame that we can tell you already have. And it can make you more suicidal. It can make you hate yourself more, but you're still going to be trans no matter what you do. There is no therapy. There's no medication that's going to make you not trans. That's part of you forever. Like, sorry.
Yeah.
And I'm being sarcastic when I say sorry because like, honestly, like I do like being trans. We've talked about it here before. I wouldn't want my life to be in any other way. And I know that, there's a lot of people out there who might straight up live somewhere where being trans is illegal. And those, honestly, like, those are the trans people that I feel sorry for, where I'm like, Jesus Christ, I can't even imagine. But like, if you live in the US or you live in Canada, and it's like, well, if I transition, I'm going to lose my family. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to lose all my money. I'm going to have to like pack a little bag and get out and just drive away. It's like, well, that's what Lauren did, like,
yeah.
And sometimes I don't want to be an asshole, but sometimes I'm like, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You don't get, if you have like a transphobic family, then it's probably going to be the case that you don't get to have both your family and your identity.
Yeah.
Like, those are the cards that are dealt to you. This is the reality that you're living in. And it's really hard to face a reality like that. But a lot of trans people before you have dealt with that. There are a lot of trans people today who are dealing with that. And you're not alone. You have community. You have that fucking superpower.
I think that, I think that idea of the superpower is kind of like our optimism of the will today. If you can't have your family, your biological family in your life, yeah, okay, I can see how that sucks. But you're making room for a new family to come in, and you'll find those people. Like, I found Oliver on a fluke, and I absolutely consider him family. And you'll find your own Oliver as you go through life, and as you are being true to yourself. If people know who you are, like if you're being authentic, like that's gonna attract the right people into your life, because people can read you correctly. And like when I was deep in the closet and in denial, that was the loneliest period of my life, because people probably picked up that I was acting really weird and inauthentic. And since I've been a pretty girl, I've made a ton of friends, and my life is a lot better for it. So,
one of the hard things about being inauthentic is, before I started transitioning and whenever I was like in my hyper feminine phase, I had no problem getting like a partner, or especially guys in my life. And it's like, to a lot of people, especially predatory people, they don't care if you're being inauthentic. They don't care if you're insecure. Like, if somebody's predatory and they just want something from you, or want a body like yours in their life that they can claim, like, that can be really dangerous for you. Not just like in that relationship, but like, it's dangerous to like the core of yourself. To surround yourself with people who don't see you and don't care to see you. You
gotta find your own pink opaque.
That's right.
All right. I think that concludes today's episode. You can follow I was about to call our channel the Pink Opaque. You can follow Optimism of the Will on Twitter. I'm not calling it X, it's Twitter, at OPT of the Will. If you like our content, please support us on our Patreon. That helps us make more of these, and it helps stabilize our life a lot. And you should reward your cute parasocial friends with money.
Hell yeah. Also, I'm just really glad we talked about this, and I'm glad that we rewatched this together last night. It's just really good art.
This has been great.
Privileged to live in a time where I can access trans art of this quality. Incredible shit.
Oh yeah, there's gonna be so much more great trans art as trans becomes more accepted. My theme song, my little ending thing will be the Final Fantasy music. Da 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 da. Oliver?
Oh shit. Okay, so my exit for today is gonna be to tell you guys that I got free ice cream today.
Oh, yeah, we forgot to do your 10 seconds.
It was awesome.
Okay. Where did you get free ice cream?
Okay, so what happened was I went to this ice cream place.
Yeah.
And I got an ice cream cone, and it was $2.50.
Yeah.
But they were like, if you're using a card, it's a $5 minimum. And I was like, oh, geez, well, I guess I'm going to try to pay for the guy behind me.
Yeah.
And then I tried to pay for him, and then he was like, Uno reverse card. I pay for your ice cream. And I was like, oh, hell yeah. And that ice cream was really good.
I love that. That's great.
Cookies and cream.
Cookies and cream. All right. Thank you for watching, and we will catch you next time on Optimism of the Will.
Bye.
Bye.